Metamorphoses by Ovid, Book 1.
Changes of shape, new forms are the theme which my spirit impels me, now to recite. Inspire me, O gods, it is you who have even transformed my art, and spin me a thread from the world's beginning down to my own lifetime in one continuous poem. Before the earth and the sea and the all-encompassing heaven came into being, the whole of nature displayed but a single face, which men have called chaos, a crude, unstructured mass, nothing but weight without motion, a general conglomeration of matter composed of disparate, incompatible elements. No Titan the sun god was present to cast his rays on the universe, nor Phoebe the moon to replenish her horns and grow to her fullness. No earth suspended in equilibrium, wrapped in its folding mantle of air, nor Amphitrite, the goddess of ocean, to stretch her sinuous arms all around the earth's long coastline. Although the land and the sea and the sky were involved in the great mass, no one could stand on the land or swim in the waves of the sea, and the sky had no light. None of the elements kept its shape, and all were in conflict inside one body, the cold with the hot, the wet with the dry, the soft with the hard, and weight with the weightless. The god who is nature was kinder and brought this dispute to a settlement. He severed the earth from the sky, and he parted the sea from the land. He separated translucent space from the cloudier atmosphere. He disentangled the elements so as to set them free from the heap of darkness, then gave them their separate places and tied them down in a peaceful concordat. Fire flashed out as a weightless force in the vaulted heaven and found its rightful place at the height of the firmament. Air came next in position and lightness. Earth was denser than these, attracted the larger particles, and sank through the downward thrust of its weight. In the nether region came water, confining the solid disk in its liquid embrace. When the god, whichever one of the gods, had divided the substance of chaos and ordered it thus in its different constituent members, first, in order that earth should hang suspended in perfect symmetrical balance, he molded it into the shape of a great sphere. Next, he commanded the seas to scatter and swell as they fronted the blast of the winds, surrounding the earth with its circle of shore. To the ocean he added the springs, huge standing pools, and the lakes, and rivers to wind downstream as their sloping banks confined them. These, in their various places, may be absorbed by the earth itself, or travel as far as the sea, where they enter the broad expanse of more open water and beat on the shore instead of their banks. Then he commanded the plains to extend and the valleys to sink, the woods to be decked in their leaves, and the rock-faced mountains to soar. And just as the sky is cut into zones, with 2 to northward, 2 to the south, and a 5th which burns with more heat than the others, so with the earth which the sky encloses. The god in his wisdom ordained 5 separate zones, or tracks, to be traced on its surface. The central zone is too hot for men to inhabit the region. 2 are buried in snow, but 2 he placed in between, and thus he blended the heat with the cold in a temperate climate. Hanging over the lands is the air, whose weight exceeds that of fire by as much as the weight of earth exceeds that of water. It was here that the god commanded the mists and the clouds to settle, here that he posted the thunder to trouble the hearts of men, with the winds which cause the lightning that burns and the lightning that flashes. Still, the Creator did not allow the winds dominion over the whole wide range of air. As it is, they can scarcely be stopped from tearing the world to pieces, though each of them governs his blasts in a distant quarter. So angrily brothers can quarrel. Eurus's retreat is the home of the dawn, from the realms of Arabia and Persia through to the mountains that gleam in the morning sunlight. Zephyr is close to the evening and fans the shores that are warmed by the setting sun. Boreas, lord of the blizzard, sweeps into Scythia, land of the frozen north, while Auster, opposite, drenches the soil of the south with his clouds of incessant rain. Above the turbulent lower air, the Creator imposed the weightless, translucent ether, untainted by earthly pollution. Nature had hardly been settled within its separate compartments when stars, which had long been hidden inside the welter of chaos, began to explode with light all over the vault of the heavens. And lest any part of the world should be wanting its own living creatures, the floor of heaven was richly inlaid with the stars and the planets. The waves of the sea were assigned as the realm of the glinting fishes, the earth was the home of the beasts, and the yielding air of the birds. Yet a holier living creature, more able to think high thoughts, which could hold dominion over the rest, was still to be found. So man came into the world. Maybe the great artificer made him of seed divine in a plan for a better universe. Maybe the earth, that was freshly formed and newly divorced from the heavenly ether, retained some seeds of its kindred element. Earth, which Prometheus, the son of Iapetus, sprinkled with raindrops and molded into the likeness of gods who govern the universe. Where other animals walk on all fours and look to the ground, man was given a towering head and commanded to stand erect with his face uplifted to gaze on the stars of heaven. Thus clay, so lately no more than a crude and formless substance, was metamorphosed to assume the strange new figure of man. First to be born was the Golden Age. Of its own free will, without laws or enforcement, it did what was right and trust prevailed. Punishment held no terrors. No threatening edicts were published in tablets of bronze. Secure, with none to defend them, the crowd never pleaded or cowered in fear in front of their stern-faced judges. No pine tree had yet been felled from its home on the mountains and come down into the flowing waves for journeys to lands afar. Mortals were careful and never forsook the shores of their homeland. No cities were yet ringed round with deep, precipitous earthworks. Long, straight trumpets and curved bronze horns never summoned to battle. Swords were not carried, nor helmets worn, no need for armies, but nations were free to practice the gentle arts of peace. The earth was equally free and at rest, untouched by the hoe, unscathed by the plowshare, supplying all needs from its natural resources. Content to enjoy the food that required no painful producing, men simply gathered arbutus fruit and mountain strawberries, coronal cherries and blackberries plucked from the prickly bramble, acorns too which they found at the foot of the spreading oak tree. Spring was the only season. Flowers which had never been planted were kissed into life by the warming breath of the gentle zephyrs. And soon the earth, untilled by the plow, was yielding her fruits, and without renewal, the fields grew white with the swelling corn blades. Rivers of milk and rivers of nectar flowed in abundance, and yellow honey distilled like dew from the leaves of the ilex. When Saturn was cast into murky Tartarus, Jupiter seized the throne of the universe. Now there followed the age of silver, meaner than gold, but higher in value than tawny bronze. Gentle spring was no longer allowed to continue unbroken. The king of the gods divided the year into 4 new seasons: summer, changeable autumn, winter, and only a short spring. The sky, for the first time, burned and glowed with a dry white heat, and the blasts of the wild winds froze the rain into hanging icicles. People now took shelter in houses. Their homes hitherto had been caves, dense thickets or brushwood fastened together with bark. For the first time, also, the corn was sown in long plowed furrows, and oxen groaned beneath the weight of the heavy yoke. A third age followed the Silver Age, the Bronze generation, crueler by nature, more ready to take up menacing weapons, but still not vile to the core. The final age was of iron. The floodgates opened, and all the forces of evil invaded a breed of inferior metal. Loyalty, truth, and conscience went into exile, their throne usurped by guile and deception, treacherous plots, brute force, and a criminal lust for possession. Sailors spread their sails to the winds they had tempted to so rarely before, and the keels of pine that had formerly stood stock still on the mountain slopes presumptuously bobbed in the alien ocean. The land which had been as common to all as the air or the sunlight was now marked out with the boundary lines of the wary surveyor. The affluent earth was not only pressed for the crops and the food that it owed, men also found their way to its very bowels, and the wealth which the god had hidden away in the home of the ghosts by the Styx was mined and dug out, as a further incitement to wickedness. Now dangerous iron and gold, more dangerous even than iron, had emerged. Grim war appeared, who uses both in his battles and brandished his clashing weapons in hands bespattered with slaughter. Men throve on their thefts. No guest was safe from his hosts, no father secure with his daughter's husband. Love between brothers was found but seldom. Men and their wives would long for each other's demise. Wicked stepmothers brewed their potions of deadly wolfsbane. Sons would cast their father's horoscopes prematurely. All duty to gods and to men lay vanquished, and Justice the Maiden was last of the heavenly throng to abandon the blood-drenched earth. The upper air was not to be left in greater peace than the earth below. The story goes that the giants aspired to the throne of heaven and built a path to the stars on high by piling mountain on mountain. Then it was that almighty Jupiter launched his lightning bolts to shatter Olympus, and shook Mount Pelion down from its base on the ridges of Ossa. When, crushed by the mass they had raised, those fearsome bodies lay prostrate, Mother Earth, as the story continues, now steeped and drenched in the blood of her offspring, gave fresh life to the seething liquid. Unwilling that all the fruits of her womb should be lost and forgotten, she turned their blood into human form, but the new race also looked on the gods with contempt. Their passionate lust for ferocious violence and slaughter prevailed. You'd have known they were born of blood. When Jupiter, son of Saturn, looked down from the heights of heaven, he sighed, and remembered the gruesome banquet served at Lycaön's table, a recent event and not yet publicly rumored. Mightily angry as only Jove can be angry, he called a general assembly, and all responded at once to his summons. In cloudless skies you can clearly see a path in the heavens. Men call it the Milky Way, well known for its brilliant whiteness. This is the road which the gods must take to the mighty Thunderer's royal palace. The well-thronged halls to the right and the left, with their doors flung open, belong to the gods of the highest rank. The common divinities live outside. Right here the elite and heavenly powers that be have established their hearths and homes. And this is the place which, if I could muster the boldness to say it, I'd not be afraid to describe as the Palatine Hill of the firmament. After the gods had taken their seats in the marble chamber, Jove, enthroned on a day and clutching his ivory scepter, shook the awesome locks of his head 3 times and again, so causing the earth and the sea and the constellations to tremble. Then opened his lips to give vent to his wrath in the following manner. The fear that I feel today for the sovereign power of the universe equals my fear when each of the snake-footed giants was striving to lay his 100 hands on the sky and make it his own. Fierce as that enemy was, its impetus sprang from a single body and source. But now I am forced to commit the whole race of mankind to destruction, wherever the ocean roars on the shore. By the streams of the Stygian river below, I swear I shall do it. Let other cures be attempted first, but what is past remedy calls for the surgeon's knife, lest the parts that are sound be infected. I have my demigods, all those powers of the countryside, nymphs and fauns and satyrs, my woodland spirits who dwell on the mountains. These we have not yet chosen to welcome to heavenly honors, but let us allow them at least to dwell on the earth we have given them. Or do your honors believe their safety is firmly assured, when I, who am lord of the lightning and master of all you gods, am the object of plots hatched up by that infamous savage Lycaön? The house was in uproar. Passions blazed as they called for the blood of the reckless traitor, as when that band of disloyal malcontents raged to extinguish the name of Rome by murdering Caesar. All mankind was suddenly struck by a terrible fear of grievous disaster to come, and the whole world shuddered in horror. And just as your people's loyal devotion is welcome to you, Augustus, so was his subjects to Jove. A word and a gesture sufficed to control the murmuring hubbub, and all were silent. Then Jupiter broke the silence again to make his pronouncement. Lycaön has paid for his crimes, so far you may rest assured. But let me describe his offense and the punishment meted out. An evil report of the times had come to my ears. Desirous and proving it false, I made my descent from the heights of Olympus and wandered over the earth, a god disguised as a mortal. It would take too long to recount the story of all the wickedness I discovered. The truth was worse than rumor reported. Crossing over the high Arcadian mountains, Maeanalus, home of wild beasts, Cyllene, and cold pine-covered Lycaeus, I entered the palace of King Lycaön and ventured beneath his inhospitable roof in the twilight hour of the nightfall. I gave a sign that a god had come, and the common people turned to their prayers. Lycaön began by mocking their piety. Then he said, "Is it a god or a mortal? I'll settle the matter by using a simple test. There will be no doubt where the truth lies." His plan was to make a sudden attack in the night on my sleeping body and kill me. This was his chosen method of proving the truth. Not content with that, he applied his sword to the throat of a hostage sent from Epirus and under my own protection. And while the man's flesh still held some warmth, he roasted part of it over the fire and poached the remainder in boiling water, then set this repast on the table. My moment now had arrived. My lightning of vengeance struck, and the palace collapsed in ruins on top of the household gods who shared the guilt of the master. Frightened out of his wits, Lycaön fled to the country where all was quiet. He tried to speak, but his voice broke into an echoing howl. His ravening soul infected his jaws. His murderous longings were turned on the cattle. He still was possessed by bloodlust. His garments were changed to a shaggy coat, and his arms into legs. He was now transformed to a wolf, but he kept some signs of his former self, the grizzled hair and the wild expression, the blazing eyes and the bestial image remained unaltered. One house has fallen, but more than one has deserved to perish. The demon of madness is holding dominion the wide world over. You'd think that the human race had joined in an evil conspiracy. This is my sentence. Let all of them speedily pay for their crimes. Jove had spoken. Some fueled his anger further by cheering loudly, while others simply expressed their approval by clapping. But still, a murmur went round. The loss of the human race will be widely deplored, and what will a world bereft of mortals be like in the future? Who will bring to our altars the offerings of incense? Is earth to be left to the mercies of ravaging wild beasts? Such were their questions, but Jupiter told them not to be anxious. He would take care of the future, he said, and he promised to breed a new race of miraculous birth, unlike the people before it. The god was now on the point of launching his bolts onto the whole wide earth, but he feared that the conflagration might cause the holy ether to catch fire too, in a blaze from pole to pole. He also remembered the fate's decree that a time would arrive when the sea and the land and the royal palace of heaven would burst into flames, and the complex mass of the universe come to grief. So he put the lightning forged in the Cyclops' workshop aside, and chose a different method of punishing mortals, by massing his storm clouds over the sky and destroying the race in a great flood. All of the gales which scatter the gathering clouds, and among them the north wind Aquilo, Jupiter promptly imprisoned inside the caverns of Aeolus. Notus, the wind of the south, he released. Notus flew out on his soaking wings, his terrible visage covered in pitchy gloom. His beard was a bundle of rainstorms. Water streamed from his hoary locks, his forehead a cushion for mists. His wings and the folds of his garments were sodden and dripping. He squeezed the bank of menacing clouds like a sponge, and a thunderclap followed. Instantly rain poured down from the sky in torrents. Juno's messenger, decked in her mantle of many colors, Iris the rainbow, sucked up moisture to thicken the clouds. The corn was flattened, the farmer wept for his wasted prayers, and all the fruits of a long year's labor were gone to no purpose. Jupiter's anger did not stop short in the sky, his own kingdom. Neptune, the sea god, deployed his waters to aid his brother. He summoned the rivers, and, when they'd arrived at their master's palace, he spoke to the meeting. "No need for a lengthy harangue," he said. "Pour forth in the strength that is yours. It is indeed. Open the floodgates, down with the barriers, give full rein to the steeds of your streams." He had spoken. The rivers returned to relax the curbs on their sources, and then rolled down to the ocean flats in unbridled career. Neptune himself now struck the earth with his trident. It trembled under the blow, and a raging torrent gushed from the chasm. Bursting their confines, the rivers engulfed the plains and the valleys. The orchards along with the crops, and the cattle along with the people. Houses and shrines with their sacred possessions were swept to oblivion. Dwellings which stood their ground and were able to face such an onslaught, untoppled, were still submerged from above by an overwhelming, mountainous wave, which leveled their pinnacles deep in the flood tide. And now no more could the land and the sea be clearly distinguished. The world was reduced to an ocean without any coastline. Look at the man on that hill, or sitting alone in his fishing boat, rowing across the fields where he recently guided his plowshare. Another is sailing above his cornfields or over the roof of his vanished farmhouse, or casting his line in the top of an elm tree. He might have dropped anchor to catch in the soil of a grassy meadow, or else his dinghy is scraping the vineyard trellis below him. There in the field where the slender goats were lately browsing on tufts of grass, the seals are resting their clumsy bodies. Underwater, the Nereids gaze in utter amazement at coppices, cities, and buildings. The woods are invaded by dolphins, blundering into the branches and bumping the trunks till they shake them. Wolves are swimming among the sheep, tawny lions and tigers are swept along in the flood. No use to the boar is his lightning strength, nor the speed of his legs to the floundering stag. At the end of a tedious search for land and a resting place, with wings exhausted, and the wandering bird flutters down to the waves. Small hills are completely submerged by the sea in its limitless freedom, and billows are strangely beating against the peaks of the mountains. All but a few have been drowned in the flood, and any survivors, for shortage of food, are destroyed by long drawn-out starvation. Phocis lies in the country between Boeotia and Thessaly, fertile land when still it was land. At the time of the flood, it was part of the sea, and a plain of suddenly spreading water. Here you can visit a twin-peaked mountain called Parnassus, towering up to the stars and hiding its head in the clouds. This was the only feature the ocean had left uncovered, and here Deucalion, sailing a tiny boat with his wife, ran aground. On landing, they paid the homage due to the nymphs of the great Corycian cave, to the mountain spirits and Themis, goddess of prophecy, then in control of the Delphic oracle. You'd never find a better or more right-minded man than Deucalion, neither a more God-fearing woman than Pyrrha. When Jupiter saw that the world was a pool of swirling water, and that only one was left of so many thousand men, and only one was left of so many thousand women, both of them guiltless of sin and both devout in their worship, he scattered the mists. With the north wind's help, he banished the storm clouds, exposing the earth once more to the sky and the sky to the earth. Neptune's anger subsided as well. Laying his trident aside, he calmed the turbulent waters and called upon Triton, the sea-green merman, who heaved his shoulders, encrusted by nature with shells of the murex, above the surface, with orders to blow on his resonant conch and signal the rivers and waves to withdraw. Triton lifted his hollow horn, which wreathes in a spiral up from its mouthpiece to broaden out to a bell, the horn whose notes, when once he has filled it with breath in the midst of the deep, rebound on the echoing shoreline from east to west. So then, When the god had raised his instrument up to his lips, with the salt drops streaming down from his beard, and the blast had sounded the bidden retreat, it was heard by all the water of land and ocean, and all the waters by which it was heard were held in check. The sea recovered its shores, the rivers, though full, were confined to their channels. The flooding receded, the hills were seen to emerge. The earth rose up as the waves died down. Dry land expanded. At the end of a long, long day, the tops of the trees in the forest began to appear, their leaves still thick with a coating of slime. The world was restored, but when Deucalion saw it was empty, and felt the silence brooding over the desolate earth, he burst into tears and said to Pyrrha, his dear companion, "My cousin, my wife, the only woman who still survives. First we were tied by our kindred blood, and then by our marriage. Now our very danger unites us. Here is the world, with its glorious lands from east to west, and here are we, an inglorious crowd of two. All else belongs to the sea. As yet, indeed, we can hardly be certain the life that we have is safely assured. These clouds still fill me with fear and foreboding. How would you now be feeling, my poor dear love, if I had been lost and you had been snatched from death? How could you have suffered fear on your own, with no one there to comfort your sorrow? Believe me, if you were lying beneath the waves, my beloved, I should follow you there to be drowned in the waves beside you. I wish I could use my father Prometheus's skill to create mankind once again and breathe new life into molded clay. Today we two are all that is left of the human race. That is the will of the gods. We survive as nothing but relics." He spoke, and they wept. They then decided to pray to the heavenly power of Themis and crave her help in a sacred oracle. Speedily, side by side, they made their way to Cephisus. The river was still disturbed but cutting its usual channel. Drawing some water, they sprinkled it over their heads and their garments, and bent their footsteps towards the shrine of the holy goddess. Its gable was pale with unsightly moss, and the fires on the altar were dead. When they reached the temple steps, they both prostrated themselves and fearfully pressed their lips on the cold, hard pavement, saying aloud, "If the prayers of the righteous can soften the hearts of the gods and win them over, transforming their anger to kindness, gentle Themis, declare to us how to repair the loss of our wretched race and come to the aid of our deluged world." The heart of the goddess was moved, and she gave her response to them, saying, "Leave this sanctuary, cover your heads, and ungirdle your garments, then cast the bones of your mighty mother behind your backs." They were long dumbfounded. Pyrrha was first to break the silence, and voice her protest aloud. She refused to obey the goddess's commands. With trembling lips she begged for pardon, too frightened to give such offense to her mother's ghost by casting her dead bones. Meanwhile, they silently pondered the words of the puzzling reply, which had come from the oracle's dark recess, and discussed them together. Prometheus's son then gently suggested, to calm Epimetheus's daughter, "Unless my wits are awry and solely deceiving me, oracles must be holy and never command what is sinful. Our mighty mother is earth. I believe what is meant by her bones are the stones on her body, and these we are bidden to cast behind us." Though Pyrrha was much impressed by her husband's interpretation, her hopes still wavered. They both distrusted the oracle's bidding, but saw little harm in trying. Proceeding down from the temple, they covered their heads, ungirdled their robes, and stepping out boldly, scattered some stones behind their backs, as the oracle ordered. Who would believe what ensued if it wasn't confirmed by tradition? The stones started to lose their essential hardness, slowly to soften, and then to assume a new shape. They soon grew larger, and gathered a nature more gentle than stone. An outline of human form could be seen, not perfectly clear, like a rough-hewn statue partially carved from the marble and not yet properly finished. But still, The part of the stones which consisted of earth and contained some moisture was turned into flesh. The solid, inflexible matter was changed into bones, and the veins of the rock into veins of blood. In a moment of time, by the will of the gods, the stones that were thrown from the hands of a man were transformed to take on the appearance of men, and women were fashioned anew from those that were thrown by a woman. And so our race is a hard one. We work by the sweat of our brow and bear the unmistakable marks of our stony origin. Other creatures after their various kinds came forth from the earth by spontaneous self-generation. The lingering moisture was warmed by the rays of the sun, and the heat made the mud in the water-logged marshes swell and expand. The seeds of animal life were fed in the mother's womb of life-giving soil which engendered them, growing in course of time to the shapes of the different species. Such we can see when the seven-mouthed Nile has withdrawn from the flood-drenched fields and brought its waters back to their normal channels. After the freshly deposited mud grows hot in the sunshine, the farmers, turning the clods with their plows, discover a horde of new creatures. Some have arrived on the threshold of life and can even be watched at the moment of birth, while others are still half-formed and without their limbs. It will sometimes appear in a single body that one of its parts is alive and the rest is composed of mere earth. When heat and moisture are blended, we know that they lead to conception. Everything owes its first beginning to these two elements. Though fire is at war with water, their combination produces the whole of nature, procreation from friendly enmity. So at the time straight after the flood, when the earth was muddy and heated again from above by the rays of the sun, it produced an infinite number of species. Some of the forms which emerged were familiar before, but others were new and amazing creations. Amongst these forms was an unknown serpent, the monstrous Phaëthon, also brought forth by Earth at the time, though she cannot have wished for it. Sprawling over Parnassus, it horribly frightened the newborn peoples until it was killed by the deadly shafts of Apollo, whose only targets before were the timid gazelles and the roe deer. The snake was transfixed by 1,000 arrows, the quiver was almost emptied, and out of its wounds there spewed black gushes of venom. In order that time should never destroy the fame of this exploit, Apollo established the sacred games attended by huge crowds, the Pythian Games, called after the serpent he vanquished, Phaëthon. Here the athletes who won their events on track or on field, or the chariot race, would receive the glorious crown of an oak wreath. The laurel had not yet appeared, and Phoebus would garland the flowing locks of his comely head with any available foliage. Apollo's first love was Daphne, the child of the river Peneus. Blind chance was not to be blamed, but Cupid's spiteful resentment. Phoebus, still in the flush of his victory over the serpent, had noticed the love god bending his bow and drawing the string to his shoulder, and asked him, "What are you doing with grown-up weapons, you mischievous boy? That bow would better be carried by me. When I fire my shafts at my foes or beasts, they're unfailingly wounded. My numberless arrows have just destroyed the venomous Phaëthon, which filled whole acres of mountainside with its belly's infections. You be content with your torch, and use it to kindle some passion or other, but don't usurp any honors belonging to me." The son of Venus replied, "Your arrows, Apollo, can shoot whatever you choose, but I'll shoot you. As mortal creatures must yield to a god, your glory will likewise prove to be subject to mine." Then he beat his wings and cut a path through the atmosphere, nimbly alighting upon the heights of shady Parnassus. Once there, he drew from his quiver 2 arrows of contrary purpose. One is for rousing passion, the other is meant to repel it. The former is made of gold, and its head has a sharp, bright point, while the latter is blunt and weighted with lead one side of the reed shaft. That was the arrow which Cupid implanted in Daphne's bosom. The other was aimed at Apollo, and smote to the core of his being. Phoebus at once was filled with desire, but Daphne fled from the very thought of a lover. She joyed in the forest lairs and in spoils of captive beasts, like the virgin goddess Diana, binding her carelessly flowing locks in a simple headband. Courted by suitors in droves, Peneus's daughter rejected them. Stubbornly single, she'd roam through the woodland thickets without concern for the meaning of marriage or love or physical union. Often her father remarked, "You owe me a son, my daughter," or else he would say, "Now when, my child, will you give me a grandson?" Marriage torches to Daphne were nothing less than anathema. Blushes of shame would spread all over her beautiful cheeks. She would lovingly cling to her father's neck in a coaxing appeal, and say to him, "Darling father, I want to remain a virgin forever. Please let me." Diana's father allowed her that. Peneus granted her wish, but Daphne's peculiar beauty and personal charm were powerful bars to her prayer's fulfillment. Phoebus caught sight of her, fell in love, and longed to possess her. Wishes were hopes, for even his powers of prophecy failed him. Think of the flimsy stubble which burns in a harvested cornfield, and think of a blazing hedgerow fired by a torch which a traveler has carelessly brought too close or dropped behind him at daybreak. So was the god as his heart caught fire, and the flame spread through to the depths of his soul, and passion was fueled with empty hope. He eyes the hair hanging loosely over her neck, and murmurs, "What if that hair were neatly arranged?" He looks at her bright eyes, burning and twinkling like stars. He studies her lips, so teasingly tempting. He fondly admires her hands with their delicate fingers. He dotes on the shapely arms, so nearly bare to the shoulder. What's hidden, he thinks, must be even better. But swift as the light breeze, Daphne is gone, with never a pause, as he calls out after her, "Stop, dear Daphne, I beg you to stop. This isn't an enemy chasing you. Stop. You would think I'm a wolf pursuing a lamb, a lion hunting a deer, or an eagle pouncing on fluttering doves in midair, but I'm not. It is love that impels me to follow you. Have pity. How frightened I am that you'll fall and scratch those innocent legs in the brambles. You mustn't be hurt on account of me. The ground where you're rushing away is so rough. Slow down, my beloved, I beg you. Don't run so fast, and I promise to slow down too. Now ask who it is that desires you. I'm not a wild mountain dweller. This isn't an uncouth shepherd minding the flocks and the herds round here. Impetuous girl, you have no idea who you're running from. That's why you're running so fast. Listen, I am the master of Delphi, Claros, and Tenedos, Patara's temple too. My father is Jupiter. I can reveal the past, the present, and future to all who seek them. I am the lord of the lyre and song. My arrows are deadly, but one is even more deadly than they are. The shaft which has smitten a heart that has never been wounded before. Healing is my invention. The world invokes me as helper, and I am the one who dispenses the herbs with the power to cure. Alas, no herbs have the power to cure the disease of my love. Those arts which comfort the whole of mankind cannot comfort their master. Apollo wanted to say much more, but the terrified Daphne ran all the faster. She left him behind with his speech unfinished. Her beauty was visible still, as her limbs were exposed by the wind. The breezes which blew in her face managed also to flutter her dress, and the currents of air succeeded in blowing her tresses behind her. Flight made her all the more lovely, but now the god, in his youthful ardor, was ready no longer to squander his breath on wheedling pleas. Spurred on by desire, he followed the trail with new vigor. Imagine a greyhound. Imagine a hare it has sighted in open country, one running to capture his prey, the other for safety. The hound is about to close in with his jaws. He believes he is almost there. He is grazing the back of her heels with the tip of his muzzle. The hare isn't sure if her hunter has caught her, but leaps into freedom, clear of the menacing jaws and the mouth which keeps brushing against her. So with Apollo and Daphne, the one of them racing in hope and the other in fear, but the god had the pinions of love to encourage him. Faster than she, he allowed her no rest. His hands were now close to the fugitive's shoulders. His breath was ruffling the hair on her neck. Her strength exhausted, the girl grew pale. Then, overcome by the effort of running, she saw Peneus's waters before her. "Help me, father," she pleaded. "If rivers have power over nature, mar the beauty which made me admired too well, by changing my form." She had hardly ended her prayer, when a heavy numbness came over her body. Her soft white bosom was ringed in a layer of bark. Her hair was turned into foliage, her arms into branches. The feet that had run so nimbly were sunk into sluggish roots. Her head was confined in a treetop, and all that remained was her beauty. Tree though she was, Apollo still loved her. Caressing the trunk with his hand, he could feel the heart still fluttering under the new bark. Seizing the branches as though they were limbs in his arm's embrace, he pressed his lips to the wood, but the wood still shrank from his kisses. Phoebus then said to her, "Since you cannot be mine in wedlock, you must at least be Apollo's tree. It is you who will always be twined in my hair, on my tuneful lyre, and my quiver of arrows. The generals of Rome shall be wreathed with you, when the jubilant paean of triumph is raised and the long procession ascends the Capitol. On either side of Augustus's gates your trees shall stand sentry, faithfully guarding the crown of oak leaves hanging between them. As I, with my hair that is never cut, am eternally youthful, so you, with your evergreen leaves, are for glory and praise everlasting." Apollo the healer had done. With a wave of her new-formed branches the laurel agreed, and seemed to be nodding her head in the treetop. Thessaly boasts a ravine called Tempe, enclosed on each side by a rock fence covered with trees, and down it the temper of Peneus pours and rolls on his foaming way from the foot of Mount Pindus. Powerfully tumbling, the cataract leaps into clouds of a wandering, wispy vapor. The spray besprinkles the trees on the cliff tops like showers of rain, and a constant roar is returned from the distance. This is the dwelling, the mansion, the innermost shrine of the mighty river god. Here he dispenses justice, enthroned in a cave carved out of the rock, to all of his waters and nymphs of the waters. This was the gathering point of firstly the local rivers, uncertain whether they ought to congratulate Daphne's father or offer condolence. Spercheius, whose banks are bordered with poplars, restless Inopius, ancient Apidanus, gentle Amphrysus, and Aias. These were shortly followed by other streams, who wander lazily down to the sea as their currents impel them. Only Inachus failed to appear. He was buried away in the depths of his cavern, adding tears to his waters in pitiful grief for the loss of his daughter Io. He didn't know whether she was still alive or had gone to the shades, but as she was nowhere at all to be found, he feared the worst and believed she had vanished. What happened? As Io was one day coming away from her father's river, Jupiter saw her and cried, "You beautiful maiden, worthy of Jove, how happy the husband who makes you his own. You should rest in the depths of these shady woods." And he pointed them out. While the sun is so high in the sky at its zenith and burning so fiercely, if you are afraid to enter the wild beast's lairs on your own, you'll be safe with a god to guide you into the forest's secret recesses. No ordinary god, but I who wield in my mighty hand the scepter of heaven and hurl the volatile lightning. She started to flee. "Don't run from me now. Already she'd left the pastures of Lerna and woody Lycaean country behind her, when Jupiter, throwing a mantle of darkness over the wide earth, halted the flight of the runaway nymph and stealthily raped her. Meanwhile, Queen Juno directed her gaze on the middle of Argos. The day had been bright and sunny, but now, to her great surprise, the clouds had suddenly turned it to night. The mist didn't come from the river, she saw, but it couldn't be due to the earth's own moisture. Where was her husband? She looked all around. She was quite familiar with Jupiter's amorous tricks, as she'd caught him straying so often. As soon as she failed to find him in heaven, her instant reaction was, "Either I'm wrong or I'm wronged," and gliding down through the air, she alighted on earth and commanded the mists to remove themselves. The god, however, anticipating his consort's arrival, had changed the daughter of Inachus into a snow-white heifer. Even so, she was perfectly lovely. Saturnian Juno, as much as it galled her, was forced to admire the beautiful creature. "Whose is it? Whence does it come? What herd?" she inquired in pretended ignorance. "Born of the earth," lied Jupiter, hoping to silence her searching questions. Juno then asked him, "Please will you give her to me as a present?" What was he to do? To surrender his love would be cruelly painful, but not to give her would look suspicious. Conscience would argue for her surrender. His love was against it. Love indeed would have won the battle, but if he refused the paltry gift of a cow to the wife who was also his sister, it could have appeared that the creature was not exactly a heifer. Juno's rival was now in her power, but her fears continued to haunt her. She still suspected Jove and his treacherous wiles, until she put Argus, the son of Arestor, in charge of Io. Argus's head had 100 eyes, which rested in relays, 2 at a time, while the others kept watch and remained on duty. Whichever way he was standing, his eyes were always on Io. Even behind his back, she could never escape from his watchful stare. She could graze in the daytime, but after sundown he'd pin her inside an enclosure and tie her innocent neck with a halter. Her food was tree leaves and bitter herbs. Her bedding was earth, not always too grassy. Her water came from the muddy streams. When Io wanted to supplicate Argus with outstretched arms, no arms were there to outstretch. When she opened her mouth to complain, her own voice startled her. All that emerged was a hideous lowing. She came to the banks where so often she'd played, the banks of her father Inachus. Here, when she looked in the water and saw her reflected head with its strange new horns, she recoiled from herself in a panic. The naiads had no idea who she was, and even Inachus failed to know her. But she still followed her father and sisters quickly along, and allowed them to pat her back and admire her. Inachus plucked some grass and tenderly held it out to her. Licking and kissing her father's hands, she couldn't help weeping. If only words could have followed her tears, she'd have begged him for help. She'd have told him her name and described her plight. 2 letters were all that could serve for words. 2 letters traced by a hoof in the dust, which revealed her name and the sorry tale of her transformation. "Woe and alas," old Inachus cried, as he tenderly fondled the horns and clung to the snowy neck of the moaning heifer. "Woe and alas," he repeated. "Are you the daughter I searched for, over the whole wide world? My sorrow was not so heavy when I was unable to find you. You're silent and cannot reply to my questions. You only respond with a deep, deep sigh from your heart. When I speak to you, all you can offer me back is a melancholy low. Blind to the future, I busied myself with plans for your wedding, in hope to gain a new son and soon to become a grandfather. Now your husband and children must come from a herd of cattle. If only death could allow me to end this terrible sorrow. Sadly, I have to remain a god, and the gates of Hades are barred to me. Grief must be my companion forever and ever." So the father lamented, but star-eyed Argus discreetly eased him aside and led the daughter away to more distant pastures. There he transferred himself to the heights of a mountain summit, from where he could sit and keep watch in every direction. The king of the gods could no longer endure his beloved Io's pain and distress. He summoned his son, whom Maia the radiant Pleiad had borne, and gave him his orders to murder Argus. Mercury only paused to don his winged sandals, cover his head, and seize the sleep-giving wand which empowers his hand. Thus attired, the offspring of Jupiter leapt from his father's citadel down to the earth. Once there, he discarded his wide-brimmed hat, took off his sandals, and simply clung to his snake-twined staff, which he used in herdsman's fashion to drive the goats he had rustled along his way through the scrubland, playing the while on his reed pipe. Juno's guard was entranced by the unfamiliar music. "You there, whoever you are," said Argus, "do come over and sit with me here on this rock. You'll find no richer abundance of grass for your goats, and you'll see there's plenty of shade for a herdsman." Mercury then sat down and filled the lingering hours with a desultory chat. He attempted to conquer those watchful eyes with the drone of his panpipes, but Argus fought to resist sleep's soft seduction. While some of his 100 eyes were allowed to surrender, others were kept wide awake. The pipe had been newly invented, so Argus drowsily asked his companion about its invention. The god then told him a tale. In the cold Arcadian mountains, among the Nonacrian wood nymphs, there lived a remarkable naiad, Syrinx her sisters called her, whom all admired for her beauty. More than once she'd eluded pursuit by lascivious satyrs and all the various gods who dwell in the shadowy forests and fertile fields. She modeled herself on the goddess Diana in daily life and by staying chaste. When she dressed as a huntress, you might have been taken in and supposed she was Leto's daughter, but for her bow, which was made of horn where Diana's is gold. Despite it, she passed for Diana. One day she was spotted returning from Mount Lycaeus by Pan. Bedecked with a garland of sharp pine needles, he spoke to her, saying, but Mercury broke off there, and didn't describe how the nymph rejected the god's advances and fled through the fields, until she arrived at the river Ladon, peacefully flowing between its sandy banks. Since the waters were barring her way, she called on the nymphs of the stream to transform her. So just at the moment when Pan believed that his Syrinx was caught, instead of a fair nymph's body, he found himself clutching some marsh reeds. But while he was sighing in disappointment, the movement of air in the rustling reeds awakened a thin, low, plaintive sound. Enthralled by the strange new music and sweetness of tone, Pan exclaimed, "This sylvan pipe will enable us always to talk together." And so, when he'd bound some reeds of unequal length with a coating of wax, a Syrinx, the name of his beloved one, stayed in his hands. That was the story the god of Selene was going to tell, when he saw that his enemy's drowsy eyes had all succumbed and were shrouded in sleep. At once he stopped talking and stroked the sentry's drooping lids with his magic wand to make sure he was out. Then he rapidly struck with his sickle-shaped sword at his nodding victim, just where the head comes close to the neck, and hurled him bleeding down from the rock to bespatter the cliff in a shower of gore. Argus was finished. The light that had glittered in all those stars was extinguished. 100 eyes were eclipsed in a single darkness. Juno extracted those eyes and gave them a setting like sparkling jewels in the feathers displayed on the tail of the peacock, her own bird. Blazing with anger, she wasted no time in venting her fury by sending a horrible demon to frighten the eyes of Io by day and her mind at night. A goading terror was planted deep in her heart, which hounded her over the world in flight. At the end of the road was the Nile, where the tale of her toils was concluded. As soon as she reached it, she sank to her knees by the bank of the river, looked up with her neck thrown back, and lacking the arms to lift up in prayer, uplifted her face to the stars. The groans that she uttered, the tears that she shed, and her piteous lowings seemed to be challenging Jupiter, pleading with him to grant her an end to her sufferings. Jupiter then drew Juno gently into his arms, and asked her to punish Io no more. "You may banish your fears for the future," he said. "She will never provide you with cause for vexation again." And he called on the Stygian marshes to witness his promise. Once the goddess had been placated, Io recovered her human face and her body. The horn shrank down, the cow eyes narrowed. The gaping mouth grew smaller, the shoulders and hands came back. The hooves dissolved and faded away into 5 smooth toenails. All that survived of the snow-white cow was its glowing beauty. Happy once more to be standing on 2 feet only, the fair nymph rose from the ground, but frightened to speak in case she still lowed like a heifer, she nervously tried a few words in her long-lost language. Attended by linen-clad priests, she is worshipped today as a goddess. Finally, Io gave birth to a son called Epiphus, thought to be sprung from mighty Jupiter's seed, and throughout the cities his temple is linked with his mother's. One of his peers and rivals was Phaëthon, child of the sun god. On one occasion, Epiphus took exception to Phaeton's boastful talking, his failure to show him respect, and his arrogant pride in his father Phoebus. "Ridiculous booby," he sneered, "to believe every word that your mother tells you. The picture you have of your father is false and inflated." Phaeton's face grew red, but shame put a brake on his anger. He went and reported Epiphus's gibes to his mother Clymene. "To distress you further, dear mother," he added, "I, Phaëthon, known as so open and savage-tempered, said nothing. I'm deeply ashamed that these scandalous taunts should be thrown at our heads, and I couldn't refute them. Mother, if I am truly the son of a god, please give me a sign of my glorious birth and establish my title in heaven." After he'd spoken, he threw his arms round his mother's neck, imploring her, if she valued the life of himself and her husband Merops, and if she hoped that his sisters would happily marry, to offer him positive proof that his father was really the sun god. We cannot be sure whether Phaeton's prayers or Clymene's anger at what was imputed against herself affected her more. But she raised both arms to the sky and her eyes to the sun's bright beams to protest. "By yonder resplendent orb, with his glistening rays, who hears and surveys us all, my child, I swear to you now that the sun you gaze on in wonder, the sun which governs the whole world, is truly your father. If I speak false, may he ever refuse me his light, and may this day be the last when my eyes shall behold him. Small effort is needed to find your way to your father's hearth. The domain from where he arises begins where our own land ends. If your spirit impels you, be off on your way and question the sun god himself." As soon as his mother had finished speaking, Phaëthon darted out in excitement. The sky was already his own. Crossing his native Ethiopia and India, nearing the land of the sun, he hastened east to discover his father.